Giants have hired their general manager, and it is Bills assistant GM Joe Schoen. And he was the person who I had mentioned when the Giants had fired Joe Judge, that Schoen appeared to be the favorite, and there were a lot of good candidates. It was a very promising search for the Giants, and it really came down to three. Schoen, Ryan Poles, who is an executive with the Kansas City Chiefs, and Adam Peters, who is under John Lynch in San Francisco. So, and I think the final two, it appears, were Schoen and Peters. Joe Ortiz was an interesting candidate as well among the initial nine, but the only three to get a second interview was Schoen, Poles, and Peters. And all along, it appeared like Schoen would be the one to get the job, and he is. And this is very exciting. I think that he can help turn this franchise around. What he's done with the Buffalo Bills under Brandon Beane has been nothing short of spectacular. Joining the Bills in 2017, and he, was a part of, Josh Allen, becoming what he's become, and that is one of the stars of the NFL. And Schoen was, had a connection with Brandon Beane in Carolina years back. He had been in Carolina, I think from early 2000s to late, within the 2000s decade. And then, they went their separate ways, and, Schoen had been with the Miami Dolphins for a while. And then when Beane was hired as the GM of the Bills, he knew that he wanted Joe Schoen. And again, it's not like he just worked with him. It had been, a long time since. That's how highly he thought of this guy. So, I think that it was a promising sign that all along the first interview with Schoen, for the second round of Adam Schefter reported that Schoen was the first guy. Then he was the actual first interview. Then for the second round of interviews, Schoen again. So he was always the favorite. And there's just a lot there to like. I mean, he's drafted well, good trades, good with cap space, seems like a good leader. In the interviews that I've watched, there's nothing not to like here. Again, do we know if it's going to work out? Of course not. We don't know that. But I think, you're putting yourself in a position to succeed with Schoen. And I think the Buffalo Bills model is one in which to follow, because they broke it down. I mean, the Bills were a very unsuccessful franchise for a long, long time. They had to build it from the ground up, and that's kind of what you need to do with the Giants. Yes, there are some pieces here, but I think you really want someone who has a vision, who can rebuild this whole organization. I think Schoen can do that. I'm seeing a quote from Bills tight end Dawson Knox: "Giants lucky to have Joe Schoen." Thought very, very highly of in that Buffalo organization. I mean, they're in good hands, of course, Brandon Beane being their general manager. But I think that the Buffalo Bills, if the Giants can be like the Bills a few years from now, you sign up for that every day of the week. So, with Schoen being the Giant GM now we think about head coaching candidates. And for me, my number one, and who I would lean as the one who I think will get the job, but I felt more strongly about Schoen getting the GM than I do about this. Brian Daboll, it's a common fit. So he's the offensive coordinator for the Bills. He is, a huge, as far as Josh Allen, as it could relate to Daniel Jones, if that's the direction they go in, right? We don't know. Maybe they'll look at Daniel Jones and say, look, we want to go somewhere else. But what Daboll specifically did for Josh Allen was he might be the biggest reason for Allen's success, more so than Joe Schoen, is Daboll. And the offense that he's put together in Buffalo, it's one of the best offenses in the NFL. And so Daboll, I would prefer an offensive-minded head coach. That would be my preference. So he would be my number one. And not for nothing, I think if I had to make a prediction, I think Daboll will ultimately be the one who gets the job. But he has interest. There's interest in him as well. I know the Miami Dolphins want Daboll. He is one of the coaches that has interviewed for that job, and he has a history with two at Alabama. Daboll is someone who was in the Patriots. He's bounced around, over the years, but he has pretty heavy Patriot ties as well. Speaking of New England, Brian Flores. So Brian Flores, I think it's between. So I'm going to name four candidates, but two of them, Daboll and Brian Flores, the two Brians, are definitely the front runners. You can tell that I think John Mara, he's going to let Schoen decide who he wants. I think Mara definitely likes Brian Flores, and Flores would be my number two. If you were to go for a non-offensive head coach, I think Flores is the guy. I was surprised that he was fired by the Miami Dolphins. He really got a lot out of those Dolphins teams. I view him as a much better Joe Judge in terms of like just getting the most out of his players. Because Joe Judge did that in year one. But Flores from the Belichick coaching tree, and in some ways Daboll is as well, but I associate Flores a little bit more in that way. Flores is a little bit younger, about 6 years younger than Daboll, has head coaching experience. So that's, a positive for Flores, whereas Daboll doesn't have that. But Flores, I think, is one that there was some talk about him not getting along with the front office. And I think maybe he had valid reasons in doing so. He is a New York guy. I think he really would want this job. And so I think there's a lot to be said for Brian Flores. Again, once he was fired from Miami, I was like, whoa, this is interesting. Certainly among the fired head coaches, Flores was definitely the best and one that you'd expect to get a job immediately. So I think Daboll and Flores are the two front runners. I would lean Daboll, and I think Schoen would go there as well with their Buffalo ties. The other two candidates, Dan Quinn, defensive coordinator for the Cowboys, he doesn't excite me all that much. He was the head coach of the Falcons. Before that, he was the defensive coordinator for the Seahawks. And now the defensive coordinator for the Cowboys. And he's had a lot of success as a defensive coordinator. Look, and of course, with the Falcons, there was a Super Bowl appearance there, as well. So, Dan Quinn is definitely someone that shouldn't be taken lightly. And what he did with Dallas was really strong. I think that was more just doing due diligence, as it seemed like Quinn was someone who has been getting a lot of interest from the other teams with head coaching vacancies. So I think the Giants just wanted to get ahead of it, not fall behind just in case. And maybe in talking to the GM candidates in the interviews, maybe they had said, look, Dan Quinn is someone that we'd be interested in, let's get on that. So Dan Quinn in the conversation, I don't think it'll go that way, but you can never be too sure. Again, Quinn is someone who, there's a lot of respect for him in the NFL, but I kind of see him as a more successful coordinator. Now, and then the fourth person is Leslie Frazier, the defensive coordinator for the Bills. So you have Daboll, offensive coordinator, Frazier, defensive coordinator. So that would be, again, a common link with Joe Schoen. Frazier was a head coach with the Vikings before Mike Zimmer. So Leslie Frazier is someone who, again, that would be something where, if you want to go defense, I guess, and there's that background, that rapport between Schoen and Frazier. So I don't know. I personally would go with the offensive guy. That's kind of where the NFL is trending. That's how you win football games. Not to say, look, if you let's say you hire someone like Brian Flores and you link them up with someone who's a really good offensive coordinator, that could work. That absolutely could work. But I think, you'd prefer to get the head coach who is offensive minded. And we've seen that work, with these new school head coaches, Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, Matt LaFleur. The list goes on and on. I mean, even like Andy Reid is an offensive coach by trade. That seems to be mostly, where you're looking for. And what's interesting is Patrick Graham. Patrick Graham is someone who I wonder if they do give him a head coaching interview. I don't know. When the dust settles, I feel like he will not be around. But he was the defensive coordinator under Brian Flores in Miami before coming to the Giants. So Graham is a name to just look at. Whether that be staying as the defensive coordinator, there is a chance I think it's unlikely considering how close he was with Joe Judge, and there's probably interest in him around the NFL. But it's something to look. That wouldn't be such a bad scenario because the Giants defense was good. I mean, while I was critical of it, it certainly was not, the biggest issue and was really strong in 2020. So that's a pretty grand look at what the Giants situation looks like. I really think that this was a great hire. This is the first Giants GM outside of the organization since George Young in 1979. It was George Young to Ernie Accorsi, who was under Young, then Jerry Reese, who was under Accorsi, and then Dave Gettleman, who had been in the Giants organization for years prior to going to Carolina. So I'm very glad that Mara and Tisch did something outside the box for them. Something that others might find common. For them, it wasn't. They were very loyal to who they have in that building. But Joe Schoen, I think you couldn't really ask for a better hire. You honestly, based on everyone that was available, this was about as good as it could get. And I'm hoping that the head coaching decision will also be one that makes sense. And I think that you can't go wrong with Daboll or Flores. Like, if it's Flores, I won't be upset. I will not be. I'll tell you that right now. If it's Flores, I won't be upset. But Daboll would be the person who I would prefer. So we will talk about that likely next episode when the Giants do hire the new head coach. But again, great news in Giant Land as they land their new GM, Joe Schoen.